For now, over to Alan.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Pat. Thanks for asking me to lead the review. Thanks for the support throughout it, and most importantly, thanks for your leadership on this issue. As you say, it is probably the most significant challenge facing our country today. I'd also like to thank my team who are here today. They've done an absolutely brilliant job of work, of my advisors, for amassing all of the evidence, putting it all together in what I hope is a compelling and pretty comprehensive report. You might have seen that just this morning there were new figures released showing that there are now over 1 million young people in our country not in education, employment or training. It's actually more than a statistic. It's a warning that far too many young people are reaching adulthood only to find the door to opportunity closed. They're NEET. It's an ugly term, but it's a term with ugly consequences too. Aspirations thwarted, confidence drained, futures narrowed before they've properly begun. During the course of this review over the last few months, I've met, spoken, heard the views of hundreds of young people. Their voices sit at the heart of this report. Behind the statistic lie 1 million individual lives, all different, but with one thing in common. Not one of them wanted to end up being not in education, employment or training. I start with a very simple proposition. When Pat first asked me to do this work, I came to it with this view. Every young person has something to give, a skill, an aptitude, a potential. Every one of them should have an opportunity to learn or to earn. But the NEET rate in our country has barely been below 10% in 25 years. It's one thing to be ignorant about a problem. It's quite another to be neglectful. And I'm sad to say that for far too long in our country, the NEET crisis has been swept under the carpet. Not any longer. This review exists because today Britain faces a genuine generational fault line. We do not just have a chronic problem. It is getting worse, not getting better, and we have neither a system or a plan to deal with it. A decade or more ago, the problem was temporary youth unemployment, and youth unemployment today is still, of course, far too high. But now it is something deeper and far more corrosive. It is youth detachment from the labour market. Nearly 6 in 10 young people who are NEET today are economically inactive. That means they not only don't have a job, they're not looking for a job. 6 in 10 have never had a job. 20 years ago, that figure was closer to 4 in 10. Detachment is no longer temporary. For too many young people, it is becoming permanent. If the current trajectory continues, within 5 years, we forecast in this report that today's 1 in 8 young people who are NEET will climb to 1 in 6. We are at risk of a lost generation. There is much talk, of course, of this being an economic or a fiscal crisis, and indeed it is. The cumulative cost to our country of almost 1 million young people outside of education and work is estimated in my report at £125 billion a year, more than we spend on education. But the principal cost isn't borne by the taxpayer. It's borne by the young person. Being NEET has a long-term scarring impact. Cost to their confidence, cost to their health, cost to their future income. For those who spend the whole period from 18 to 24 years of age outside of education and work, as about a quarter of 24-year-old NEETs do, the lifetime loss can approach £300,000. That is not an abstract number. It's a deposit never saved, a home never bought, a pension never built, the hope of a good life never realised. So this is more than an economic crisis. It's a moral one. So the question today is no longer whether the current position is somehow unfortunate, it's whether it's sustainable. My answer is no, it is not. As a growing older generation becomes increasingly reliant on the next generation to sustain it, every young person has to have more opportunities to learn or earn and to get a job. The problem is that for too many young people, opportunities are not growing, they're shrinking. Reversing that starts with understanding what is driving it in the first place. This is the first of 2 reports that I will produce, as Pat was saying. The next, in the autumn, will provide proposed solutions to the NEET crisis. This first report diagnoses the problem. It contains a huge amount of data analysis, new research, surveys of young people, employers, teachers, health professionals. During the course of this review, we've spoken to countless organisations: disability charities, youth organisations, businesses, schools, colleges, health professionals, councils, mayors, political leaders. I've been around politics and public policy for more decades than I care to remember. I can genuinely say I've never come across an issue as visceral as this with the public. Wherever I've been, whoever I've spoken to, I've come across a deep concern, bordering on a fear, about the future facing young people. Parents are more worried than ever about their kids. Grandparents too, about their youngsters' prospects for a job, a home, a decent future. For decades in Britain, the foundation of our unwritten social contract has been that each generation would be able to do better than the last. That great British promise for this generation is being broken. The 1 million young people who are NEET are its leading casualties. They've been hit by a perfect storm. A generation ago, almost 2 in 3 of this age cohort were in work. Today, it's barely 50%. For under 18s in education, the number also holding down a job has halved during that time. Now, there's been much focus about the impact on youth employment of recent policies like the youth minimum wage and the rise in national insurance contributions. Employers repeatedly raised this with me as an issue, and it is true. The changes have had an impact. It's always a risk for an employer to take on a young person precisely because they're unproven. So if public policy wants more young people in work, it has to minimise risks and maximise incentives for employers. But no one should pretend that the structural change that has been taking place in the youth labour market has only recently been triggered. Over the last few decades, Britain has had a jobs boom, but one that has largely passed young people by. Entry-level jobs have long been in sharp decline. Compared to the start of the century, there are 1.6 million fewer low and medium-skilled jobs in the economy. Vacancies in hospitality have halved in the last 4 years. Saturday jobs have long since been in free fall. Apprenticeship starts amongst young people have fallen by 35% over the last decade. The first rung of the ladder in careers has thinned. For too many young people, it is now simply out of reach. That places them in a hopeless catch-22 position, where employers ask for work experience, but opportunities for young people to gain it have either narrowed or have gone. And by the way, that is before the impact of the AI revolution to come on jobs and workplaces. For decades, falling labour market participation was offset by rising education participation among the young. But in recent years, that too has plateaued and has marginally fallen. The biggest falls have been in further education and apprenticeships, the routes most accessible to the potentially NEET cohort. Fewer opportunities there in education mean more young people ending up being NEET. So none of this is a recent phenomenon. It's a long-term structural change. And yet for too long, public policy has treated youth disengagement mainly as a supply-side problem. Make young people more employable, raise standards in schools, improve their skills, toughen their benefits. All of these things matter, but they're not enough if the labour market, the demand side, is no longer reliably bringing people in. It's striking that almost 1/3 of today's NEETs have got good GCSEs, 15% have a degree. Being NEET used to be something that happened to other people's children. Now, parents in all parts of the country worry it could be their child. If the NEET problem is to be solved, change will be needed not just on the supply side, but on the demand side too, in labour market policy and in employer practice. Both will be needed because there's also been a fundamental change in the makeup of who is becoming NEET. There is no singular explanation for the NEET problem worsening, but there is one standout change. Over the past decade, the proportion who say they're NEET due to a work-limiting health condition has increased by 70%. The proportion of NEETs citing mental health or conditions like ADHD and autism as their primary condition has more than doubled. For the first time in perhaps 2 centuries, changes in health, especially in mental health, are impeding economic growth and causing a contraction in the supply of labour. Poor health reduces participation. Reduced participation worsens health. Worsening health makes return to work harder still. This is the vicious cycle that simply isn't being broken. Once health-related inactivity takes hold, it sticks. That's what makes the problem more entrenched than it has ever been before. Of those who fall into health-related economic inactivity, our research suggests that almost 8 in 10 remain NEET more than 2 years later. The damage done to the life chances of those young people is almost incalculable. And here, there is an elephant in the room question. How much are young people themselves to blame? Have they become softer, flakier, less resilient, more willing to blame mental health than actually suffer from it? That is not what I've found. One of the most striking findings in this review is that 84% of NEET young people that we surveyed said they wanted a job or they wanted to be in training. So I do not accept the caricature of a generation that is not interested in work. This is a generation that wants the chance to work. I do not accept that mental health is simply an excuse. We've drawn on Professor Peter Fonagy's brilliant work on mental health prevalence, which confirms that distress among the young is real and it is rising. I do not accept either that the answer is to tell young people who are struggling simply to try harder. The young people I have met are trying, applying for dozens, sometimes hundreds of jobs, hearing nothing back. And it is silence that does not just dent confidence, it kills hope. There is no shortage of effort on the part of young people. The shortage is of opportunity and of support. Young people today are different. Not worse, not lazier, not less capable. Different. They've grown up in a digital world. They were hard hit by the pandemic. They're more open about mental health. They are more anxious. In a world of greater uncertainty and less opportunity, perhaps that is not so surprising. Every generation is different from the one that went before it. The systems that support them into adulthood have always had to adapt. This time, they have not. That is not a failure of young people. It's a failure of a system stuck in the past. Of course, personal responsibility matters, effort matters, habits matter, families matter. Aspiration cannot be gifted by the state. Young people have obligations, families have responsibilities, parents as well. But it is dishonest to pretend that individual effort alone can overcome systems that are designed to solve yesterday's problem and not today's. My core diagnosis is that the system set up to support young people from the world of education into the world of employment is no longer working. In too many cases, it does not just fail to tackle the problem, it reinforces it. Whether it is education, or health, or welfare, that system fails to enable their participation in the labour market. Instead, all too often, it ends up putting young people on a path to a life not in jobs, but on benefits. Take education. Good qualifications are still one of the best defences against a young person becoming NEET. But schools, like colleges, are measured overwhelmingly on attainment, not on outcomes. That's how they're recognised, rewarded, regulated. In our survey of teachers, almost 3/4 said the curriculum put too much emphasis on passing exams and not enough focus on preparing young people for work. More than 2 in 3 of our survey of NEET young people agreed. Only 3% of employers who recruited 16-year-olds cite a lack of literacy or numeracy skills as being the problem. They point instead to a shortage of attributes: communication skills, collaboration skills, agility, adaptability. Today's workplace needs those skills. Tomorrow's, even more so. Ensuring fewer young people leave school at risk of becoming NEET depends on getting the right balance in the school curriculum and the right exposure to work experience and to careers guidance. Today, the UK has amongst the lowest levels of school work experience internationally. When employers constantly tell us that this generation is not work-ready, it's obvious that balance, despite welcome government reforms, is still not right. Similarly, the NHS. It categorises young people as being unfit to work, not least through the GP fit note process, when with help, support and earlier intervention they would be able to do so. The health system, frankly, doesn't see it as its role to help them into work. Instead, a health diagnosis becomes a gateway into a life on benefits and outside the labour market. Yet as tens of thousands of disabled people prove every single day, it's entirely possible to have a diagnosis and a disability and still be able to participate, providing, of course, you get the right support. Welfare. The welfare system must always protect those who cannot work. It must always be there to provide financial security for people with severe or enduring disabilities. That is non-negotiable. But for young people who could participate, the welfare system should be supporting them to do so. Today, it is not. It is focused more on income replacement than helping young people into work. Our analysis shows that for every £25 we spend on benefits for young people, we invest only £1 in employment support for them to get a job. Frankly, that is shocking and it is shameful. Not least when almost half of the young people claiming health or disability benefits believe they could work now with the right support or in the future if their health improves. The welfare system is founded on a deficit model of disability, one that pays for what a young person cannot do rather than investing in what they could become. It is sucking more people in and keeping them there for longer. If current trends persist, we forecast that 1 in 20 of all today's 5-year-olds will be on incapacity benefit by the time that they are aged 22. That speaks to two things, of course, for welfare reform, but also for far earlier interventions in the system. The welfare system does not have increased labour market participation among young people as a core objective. Analysis for this review shows that only around 1 in 5 young people who are NEET are getting meaningful employment support from the welfare system. £8.1 billion is being spent on key benefits for young people. Across disability, incapacity and unemployment benefit, less than half of that spend has any participation support or requirements attached to it. The system writes young people a cheque, but it doesn't help them build a plan. These fault lines mean more and more young people are being trapped on benefits for longer and longer. The numbers leaving the benefit system 5 years after first claiming a health or disability benefit have fallen by 40% in just a decade. Today, around 7 in 10 young people first claiming a health and disability benefit are still claiming a decade later. Too many of those who could work and want to do so are not being helped. Perhaps unsurprisingly, their employment prospects are not only poor, they're deteriorating. New research we've undertaken, for example, shows that just 1 in 4 people receiving PIP at age 24 are in work. In a decade, there has been an increase of over 1/3 in those first claiming health and disability benefits and being NEET 5 years later. Today, of those who first claimed a health and disability benefit aged 16 to 24, almost half are not in work or education 15 years later. 15 years. That is a catastrophic failure. The truth is, for decades across the system, education, health, welfare, we have been spending billions managing failure and pennies preventing it. Becoming NEET doesn't start at the age of 16. A child who is not school ready at the age of 4 or 5 is 3 times more likely to be NEET at the age of 16 or 17. And yet our analysis shows that over very many years, decades, prevention has been cut at every level. Early years, public health, youth services, further education. What has grown is crisis spending, late intervention and income replacement. The tragedy is that we're paying more to manage the consequences of youth disengagement than being prepared to invest in preventing it. We end up spending more to achieve less. Worse outcomes, but higher costs. It's obvious from this assessment that reform is long overdue. In education, skills, health, labour market and welfare, there is much focus on the latter, and rightly so. But welfare reform without wider state reform will not deliver the goods for this generation. The same is true for labour market reform. It is a whole system reset that is now needed. Today, responsibility for helping young people from education into employment is dispersed across a bewildering array of organisations. Each institution optimises for its own metrics. There is no shared accountability. There is no clear governing philosophy. Confusion reigns between what happens nationally and what is owned locally. Data is not shared. No amount of reform to individual policy areas or to institutions will fix this. The architecture itself is the problem. It is young people who fall through these structural fault lines. You know, one of the most troubling findings of this review is how many are hidden from the very system meant to help them. In England alone, in 2023-24, around 314,000 18 to 24-year-olds were neither in work nor in education and were not claiming benefits. A system serious about participation would know who these young people are and would do something to help them. Ours do not. They're out of work, out of sight. Frankly, they're out of mind. This is a whole system failure. Now, the government has made a start in trying to reset it. The work that Pat is leading, the Youth Guarantee, is enormously welcome. Apprenticeship reforms are welcome. The focus on school attendance, SEND reform, work experience, and the post-16 skills system, these are all positive steps in the right direction. The same is true of the recognition in the 10-year health plan that economic activity and improvements in health, mental health particularly, have to be addressed simultaneously. So too, the government's youth strategy. Each of these are serious steps. They deserve acknowledgement, but no one should pretend they're enough, either in scale or design. There is no glue that binds them together, no shared objectives, no shared incentives, no shared accountabilities, no one to join the dots. If ever there was a case for mission-based government, this is it. It's not a new programme that is needed. Down the years, we've had no shortage of those. YTS, New Deal, Future Jobs Fund, Youth Contract, traineeships, kickstarts. This is not a record of passivity. It is a record of sustained policy effort. But here's the hard truth. Despite all that effort, the problem not only persists, it's getting worse. Why? Because new initiatives laid on top of a system that is broken cannot work. It is not a new programme that is needed. It's a new approach. From a welfare state that is exacerbating inactivity to a working state that builds opportunity. The old welfare state was built for a different age. Its great historic mission was to protect people against unemployment, sickness and poverty. That mission, of course, remains vital. A decent country must always protect those who cannot work. But for this generation, protection is not enough. For young people who can participate with the right support, the system has to be more than a safety net. It has to be a springboard. The working state has to be powered by multiple levers, as much by education and health change, as labour market and as welfare change, as much by employers as by governments. Because this is more than about policy. It's about the kind of country that we want to be. It sometimes feels, when I look at it, that there aren't many causes left in modern British politics. But this is one. The scale and impact of this problem can no longer be ignored. We cannot throw a whole generation of young people on the scrap heap before their adult lives have properly begun. The change cannot simply be about saving money. It has to be about saving and improving life chances. It's not about yet more iterative reform, it's about a fundamental system reset. In the end, politics, as we know, is about choices. Over 2 decades ago, politics made it the choice to end pensioner poverty and to halve child poverty. Today, the choice has to be to make the next generation the focus of our politics, our efforts, our resources. Building a better future for the next generation can be the cause around which the whole country can unite. Not just government, but employers and educators, local leaders and local charities, parents and communities. Our country's future relies on the next generation. It is the job of this generation to ensure that every young person in the next generation, regardless of their background or their circumstances, has more opportunity to learn or to earn. This, in my view, should be the priority for government. More importantly, it should be the priority for us all. Thank you very much. Yeah. Do you want to answer some questions? No, I'll do it. Right. Hope everybody's hot enough in here.
Got time for a few questions. I'll start
Go
at
for
the top of the room, then make my way back. If you wouldn't mind just introing your question with your name and where you're from.
Hello, it's Martina Bett from The Sun.
Hi, Martina.
One thing your report highlights is the lack of skills training afforded to young people. So do you not think it would be time to revisit the idea of some kind of national service, not just limited to the armed forces, but wider civic society, for example, so they can develop the skills while also helping the economy?
Just before I answer, can I pose the room a choice? Do you want to be able to hear, or do you want to be able to sweat? Hear. Right, okay, let's switch it back off, because I can't hear either. But I'm wearing a suit jacket, unlike most of you, but anyway. Yes, look, it's a great question. And I think, you know that this report is really not about solutions at this stage, okay? But you can probably see some of the direction that we're beginning to travel in here. I think the starting point has got to be, you've really got to understand who these young people are. So this is a point that Charlie Mayfield's here with us this morning. Has done absolutely brilliant work with his Keep Britain Working review, and Charlie talks a lot about the fact that there is not one cohort. There's a series of cohorts here, and one of the cohorts is people who are sort of it's what I call the bedroom generation. Young people have been stuck in their bedrooms, doom scrolling at night. Shuaib and Peter have been around the country talking to these young people, and their report came out last week, and it's pretty obvious that, they get stuck in a particular pattern and a particular rhythm, and frankly, the idea that they're going to step straight out of their bedroom, straight into a full-time job, is pretty fatuous. So what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that the opportunities that are available for them are flexible enough. You've got to meet them halfway, if you like. So we've got to think about, what does that look like? Could be a job, could be an apprenticeship, could be a supported internship, could be some volunteering, as you say. Could be different types of service. So that is something that we'll be exploring in the weeks and months ahead. But you're right. You've got the youth guarantee is brilliant for young people who are unemployed. It's focused on the unemployed cohort. The conversations that obviously we've been having with Pat is about, so how do we make that same philosophy apply to the bigger cohort, which is the cohort who are ill, who are suffering from mental health, depression, anxiety, and that is going to take a slightly different approach. But the sort of, the seeds of what you're saying are definitely something that we want to explore.
Hi, Ashley from the Mirror. Hi.
Where are you? Sorry.
Do you think the instability in the Labour Party at the moment risks making the situation worse?
What, in terms of the policy?
The leadership.
See, no, actually, I don't. I mean, look, it's frankly outside of my terms of reference, thank God. Look, I mean, I think, whatever happens in the Labour Party, whatever happens in politics, and by the way, we're talking to all the political parties. I was talking to Helen Waitley, the Shadow Works and Pension Secretary, just this morning as we were doing the media round. I spoke to her yesterday as well. So this has got to be something that is for politics in general to sort. Yeah? And honestly, if politics can't get its act together and deal with the future of this generation, then honestly, people will take a view about politics, which is that it's not working. And when that happens, bad things happen. So my view is that, whatever happens, whoever's around, whoever's up, who's ever down, whoever's in power, this is an issue that is not going to go away. Okay? The question is somebody going to lean into it and solve it?
Thank you, Natasha from LBC.
Hi.
Thank you, Mr. Milburn. Your report says that the UK was around the European average back in 2014 for NEETs, but in 2025, only Romania had a higher NEET rate than the UK. Why do you think that is? Why have we fallen so far behind. And of course, you were as part of the last Labour government in the 2010s. I believe that it was around 2010 that, in the 2000s, I believe it was around 2010 that we started spending more on defence, benefits than defence. What responsibility do you think previous Labour governments have for this problem? When do you think this problem started?
Look, this problem, as I said, in my speech, it goes back decades, and it's been one of those issues that, people have seen it, but they've not really looked at it. You can't have a consistent need rate of 10% for 25 years. It's only fallen once below 10% during the pandemic. Okay? So this is a structural thing. And it's obviously a really difficult thing to deal with. So the easiest thing is to do the blame game. Everybody wants to blame everybody. Blame the smartphones, blame the parents, blame the benefit system, blame the employers, blame the politicians. Sure, blame the politicians, fine. But that doesn't get you anywhere. It really doesn't. You've got to understand what the hell is going on, why it's getting worse, not better. You've got to take a systems-wide view of it. And what is unique about what we try to do here is we've tried to look at it through a systems lens, both on the supply side and the demand side, and that will point us to getting answers that are sustainable. I was saying at the end of my speech that the last thing that you need is a new policy and a new programme. If you look at these things, some of them are perfectly good. New Deal, I was part of it. It was a perfectly good thing. Kickstart, introduced by the Conservative government. Perfectly good thing. Where is it today? Nowhere. These things are temporary. One of my advisors said to me in the course of a conversation, he said, isn't it a bit crazy that once in a generation, politics decides that this is a really big issue, and then we invent from scratch a brand new policy and a brand new programme? Well, what is needed is a sustained strategy and proper architecture, and that is what we're going to do.
Hello, Frances Reid, Channel 4 News. Hi. You say no blame game, but do the generations in charge across businesses, across the government, get it and actually understand what young people face? And in your view, from what you've seen, how much is it about government versus business, with growth, with business confidence? Because if you're not pulling the right levers, if the economy's bad for everybody, then no one's hiring, and then they're at the front line of it. What's your kind of anecdotal approach to that?
So I think in terms of the getting it thing, honestly, you can barely have a conversation about this anywhere. The media appetite is insatiable on this. Why is it insatiable? Because out there, it's the biggest worry that parents and grandparents have. Doesn't matter whether you're a business guy, doesn't matter whether you're a grandparent, doesn't matter who you are. Everybody is now worried that the opportunities that previous generations have had are not going to be available for this generation. That's what makes it visceral. So when you ask me, do people get it? You bet they get it. And that's true of CEOs of businesses. We were talking just earlier this week with my team to the leaders of, Amazon, John Lewis, Marks and Spencer's, McDonald's, big businesses who employ a lot of these sort of young people in entry-level jobs, and they want to do something about it. They don't just want to stand and say, isn't it terrible? You saw John Bufrey from Amazon out just a week ago talking about the need for more work experience. John gets it. Stuart gets it from M&S. These people get it. Do the politicians get it? Does Pat get it? 100%, of course. So the question that you should be posing is not that question, do they get it? The question is, what are they going to do about it? Right? And so the reason that we're trying to do this in the way that we're trying to do it is it can't just be a boring report. You guys cover that all the time. It's not another white paper, okay? It's not about that. It's about building a coalition across the country. Council leaders, the leader of Islington Council is here today, business leaders, people from disability charities, from local government. This is not just about what government does, it's about what society does. If we ignore it, we'll get what we've been getting. If we keep doing what we've been doing, we'll keep getting what we've been getting. This has got to be a fracture moment. It's got to be a change moment. It's got to be a moment when people say, enough. We just can't keep on doing this. So, do I think people get it? Yeah. I think people... Look, if you've been in politics, right, you've got to be an optimist. So I'm an optimist, generally, in life. But I'm optimistic about this. Look, it's very easy when you read the report, and there's lots of reasons for pessimism. The data's pointing in the wrong direction. The work that Shuab and Peter have done with young people, wow, it sort of opens your eyes to what is really going on out there. And it's not great. But the reasons for optimism is there comes a moment. There just does. There comes a moment when this becomes the issue that has got to be addressed. And I believe that this is this moment.
What about the economy bit of the question?
So again, repeat it. So sorry.
You said there was a bit of that question that was about the economy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So look, you're not going. This is why the demand side is as important as the supply side. So you can fix the supply side. Let's just imagine for a moment that we fixed education, we fixed skills, we fixed health, and we fixed welfare. If there are no jobs for young people, what have we fixed? We haven't fixed anything. So we've got to make it more possible for more employers to create more jobs and more opportunities for young people to progress. And one of the really distressing things, you know, for my generation, we all sort of grew up with the idea that somehow you'd walk into work. You know, it could be just something part-time, it could be a Saturday job. In my case, it was delivering newspapers in the West End of Newcastle, which I got sacked from because I couldn't get out of bed. It was like every other adolescent boy. And so that taught me a lesson. Haven't been sacked again yet. We'll see when I present the final report to Pat. So yes, so this is really important. And, you know, I don't make light of it. Employers are absolutely critical to this. Because unless we can generate more opportunities for young people, we're really not fixing the generational crisis.
We have about 20 minutes, so if people could just avoid asking follow-up so we can get the mic around the room, please.
Thank you. Richard Partington from The Guardian.
Hi, Richard.
Will reform of health and disability benefits during a cost of living crisis not risk driving poverty? And can Labour be entrusted with this type of systematic reform that you're talking about, after last year having been forced to U-turn on benefits reform because of the risk of a backbench rebellion, after having focused heavily on cutting costs as opposed to driving up employment support?
Thank you, Richard. Well, I've always taken the view that you live and learn. And I like to think that people in government, and Pat is one of them, have lived and learned. Look, if you frame welfare reform as all about cost out, and taking money away from people, particularly those who are sick and disabled, you are going to get an appropriate response, and that is what has happened. So what are we trying to do here? We're trying to do something entirely different, which is to say what is going on from young people from early years all the way through to the welfare system lens. What is it that we need to do to enable them to do what they want to do, which is to be in work, okay? And to do that, people ask me all the time, should the benefits bill be lower? The honest answer to that question is yes, it should. But the sustainable way to reduce the benefits bill is not by plucking an arbitrary figure out of thin air and saying we're going to cut it. The way to do it is to get more young people into work. Because if they're working, they're earning. If they're earning, they're paying taxes. If they're paying taxes, they're less reliant on benefits. And that's what we've got to do. We've got a system that is set up for exactly the reverse of that. What's the first instinct? The first instinct is to say to a young person, particularly with a health condition or a disabled person, you can't work. Rather than saying to them, what would it be that would enable you to work? How can we help and support you to do so? So I think, honestly, that is the right question. Is my sense that the appetite in the government is high for this? Yes, Pat is leading the charge, absolutely on this, but as I've spoken to cabinet ministers about it, my sense is that there is an appetite to go back into this, but to go back into it in the right way.
Hello, Will Hazel from the iPaper. Alan, you clearly today are setting out the kind of diagnostic of what the problem is, and I appreciate the detailed set of recommendations will come later in the year, but are you able to give us a flavour of the sort of package of welfare reform you're sort of looking at broadly? And are we talking about, for example, more conditionality when it comes to young people, so that if they don't engage in, say, work or training, that they will see reductions or complete withdrawal of the benefits they're currently receiving?
Well, what I'm not going to do at this stage is to set out what the absolute sort of detailed agenda will be, but read the analysis. Read the analysis in the welfare chapter. It tells you a story. I mean, it tells you a story of we don't intervene early enough. Yeah? We don't take the opportunities that the relationship between the benefit system and young people has to have a conversation with young people about what would you like to do. Yeah? Some of the incentives, frankly, are perverse. Some of the way the processes work are getting young people to get stuck in the benefit system for longer. So we know that that's the case. Work capability assessments. There's a backlog of 2 million. 2 million people waiting for a reassessment of their work capability. That's 2 million people who could be helped into being in a job. We're not doing face-to-face assessments in the way that we once were. That means you can't have a meaningful conversation with a young person who might, I don't know, might have autism, might be living in a rural area where there's no public transport. You want to be able to have a meaningful conversation with these people. Go to a job centre, work out what the caseload is for a work coach. Maybe 100 youngsters, 100 employed young people. How many minutes do they give to each one? Somewhere between 2 and 10. Really? You're going to sort that problem out by a transactional conversation of that sort? That turns into a compliance conversation. What it doesn't turn into is a supportive or enabling conversation. So I'm not giving you all the answers at this stage, but if you read the report, it's pretty clear where the problems lie.
Hi, Sue from The Telegraph. Is immigration part of the problem? And also Sir Keir Starmer's been writing in the Times today saying how much he cares about this issue. How many times have you directly engaged with him on it?
So on the first question on immigration, so let's get into this in the right way, okay? So and I think we try to do this in the report. We found no evidence that there is a link between levels of migration and higher levels of needs, okay? It is true, of course, that over these last few years, over these last 10 or 15 years, migration levels have been high. And very often the workers who are coming in, particularly in the low-skilled sectors of the economy, hospitality, maybe retail, hospitality more particular, they've been coming into sectors that traditionally young people have been in. So sure, that's been happening. I'd like to sort of couch it in a slightly different way, if I can, which is, I think migration is now an opportunity to help solve the need problem. We're on a downward trend of migration levels. Down, not up. I don't know how long that's going to last, but it seems to be pretty consistent. All the economists tell me that it will keep falling and we could have a minus net level of migration figure before too long. That may well bounce back, but we're probably not going to get back to anywhere like we were in previous times, around 1 million. And frankly, to be honest, too many employers have been on easy street. They've been able to import labour from overseas rather than grow labour and skills at home. And now they've all got a problem. Talk to any employer. Talk to employers in hospitality at the bottom end of the labour market. Talk to employers in technology at the top end of the labour market. And they will all complain about the same thing, which is a shortage of skilled labour. So where are they going to recruit from? There's a pool of labour. Is it straightforward? Is it easy? No. Is the pastoral burden for an employer higher? Yes, it is. And that means, back to some of these questions about national insurance contributions, and we've got to accept that the pastoral burden for employers will be higher, and therefore the support that employers will need, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, will be higher too. So I think, you just got to get this sort of couched in the right way, because honestly, it's one of those issues, it's a blame game issue. We just sort of blame immigration as the problem. It isn't. So I think that is the right way to frame it. As far as Keir is concerned, look, he's taken a huge interest in all of this all the way through. He's been right about it in the Times today. He's on this visit with Pat. And I've got no doubt for him that the passion burns around this very brightly, as it should for every single politician. I don't care whether Labour, Tory, Reform, Green, Liberal Democrat, Plaid Cymru, SNP. I'm talking to all of them. Okay? Why? Because this is an issue that has got to straddle beyond party politics. It's got to straddle beyond leadership questions. It's got to straddle beyond the to and fro of the political game. This is an issue that is visceral, it's fundamental, it's structural, and that will require political leadership from wherever it comes to address it.
Hello, Alan. Josh Miller from FE Week. Your report paints a bleak picture of the post-16 education system, and it suggests that further education colleges should be funded for outcomes and not headcounts. Do you think this funding metric is possible, given labour markets are so different across the country?
That's a really good question. So I think this is one of the things that we really need to think about as we move into the next phase of this review, and we're very actively talking to mayors, to local authorities. Why? Because the labour markets are local. The labour market in Middlesbrough is just a different labour market from Islington. It is. And the people who've got to decide about what is right in that labour market for matching supply with demand have got to be based in those local areas. Okay? And a big part of this equation is further education and vocational education more generally. Because this is going to be, we know where the shortages are, we know where the problems are, we know where the deficits are, and we know where, over recent years, unfortunately, the funding and the support simply hasn't been there. So you're absolutely right to point to this. We've got to find mechanisms, new mechanisms to put this right. I believe that's entirely possible. One of the big fault lines in the system overall is that no one focuses on destinations, on outcomes. You get your 5 good GCSEs, that's great. You get a tick in the box, the school does well, it passes its Ofsted inspection. What happens if 30% of those kids end up neat? Is that a good result? Or is it a bad result? I would say that's a bad result. So we've got to sort of change the incentive system. We've got to change the inspection system. We've got to change what it is that schools and colleges are accountable for. That's quite a big change, but honestly, it needs to happen.
John Hills from ITV News. Staying with further education, adult skills and apprenticeship spending is around 25% below 2010 levels. Adult education classroom-based spending is 50% below 2010 levels. To be clear, is that part of the problem?
Yes, it is. And one of the, if you look at countries comparable to ours, take Holland as an example. So Holland has a third of the NEET rate that we do in the UK. Is that about Dutch kids being different from British kids? Not at all. Is that about their labour market being different? Maybe a bit. What is it fundamentally about? It's about some structural things. First of all, it's about the question that you asked, Joel, which is they make a priority of vocational education and investment in it. And when you look at the numbers, there's a far higher proportion of Dutch kids, Dutch young people, in the equivalent of our FE colleges than there are here. So they've made a deliberate choice, and it's produced a pretty good outcome. Secondly, they approach things in a different structural way. So one of the very striking features of the Dutch system, for example, is it's much more integrated. The services pull together. Ours are fractured. They're integrated. They pull together. There's one data set. Critically, there's one organisation responsible. We have no one's responsible here because everyone is. And the final part of the action that they seem to get right that we get wrong is that employers are much more engaged from the outset with the education system so that kids are getting familiarity with employers, with the world of work, with work experience, with all of those things that we know that employers are crying out for. So I'm not saying you can do a lift and shift from the Dutch system because you can't. There's different traditions, different cultures, different structures. But boy, oh boy, is there something to learn.
Okay, we've just got under 10 minutes left, so if you keep your questions nice and short.
I think it's the answers that are the problem, but anyway, yeah.
I feel like that was targeted at me there.
You were coming.
You see, Alan, people will understand your argument that this is a long-term structural problem that needs to be addressed. But I want to pick up on something you said in your speech, because you said employers were raising with you decisions this government had made, that increasing the youth minimum wage and increasing national insurance on employees was making it harder. Do you agree with them? And are you urging Pat McFadden and the Prime Minister to rethink those policies?
Well, there's no doubt that, one, employers have this as a really big concern. Two, however, many employers don't pay the youth minimum wage, they pay the adult minimum wage. So that change in policy has had a minimal impact on them. Three, there are very different views about this. So, for example, the Low Pay Commission, which is the body responsible for looking at this and assessing impact of its recommended policies, has concluded that there isn't one straightforward impact. However, talk to any employer, particularly in low-margin sectors of the economy. Think about hospitality as a case in point, somebody running a pub or a restaurant. Yeah. Of course, they will say, at the margins, it has made it more difficult. And of course, that is probably right. What we've got to do, as I say, is make sure that if we want to have more young people in work, then we've got to minimise the risks for the employer, we've got to maximise their incentives, but no one should pretend that the reason that we've got the NEET problem today, that we've got the fall in entry-level jobs that we have seen, that somehow or other that was triggered 2 years ago. Look at the data. Seriously? This is not two years, it's 2 decades. It's been going on for time immemorial. And so policymakers just need to do one thing. They just need to look at the trend line, understand the data, understand what is the best thing that can be done to help rather than to hinder.
Olivia Utley, GB News. You've touched on this a couple of times, national insurance hike. GB News regularly speaks to pub landlords who employ lots of young people.
Do what? Say it again.
So, pub landlords, we speak to a lot of pub landlords who employ lots of young people, and they often say that the biggest reason why they're not employing so many young people anymore is because of that national insurance hike just over a year ago. I know that's not the entire problem, but in that sector it does seem to be a big problem. Was that hike a mistake, and should the Chancellor reverse it?
So I think I've answered that question just a second or two ago. And look, you're absolutely right. Of course, if you're in the pub trade or if you're in the restaurant trade, these are hard times. But let's be clear, why are they hard times? They're hard times because there's a cost of living crisis out there. Going to the pub or going to the restaurant or going on holiday, it's what you call discretionary spend. People don't have to do it. They do it when they're able to do it. So the principal problem that pubs and restaurants and people in the holiday trade have is a cost of living problem. Now, it's perfectly reasonable to say, does raising national insurance contributions and raising the national minimum wage, does it make that worse or better? But let's not pretend that is the root cause of the problem. Seriously? I mean, honestly, this is the thing that so frustrates me about this thing, that everybody goes for the bloody easy solution, don't they? Let's just go for the easy solution, okay? There are no easy solutions, guys. None. They're all hard. And you've got to do the proper analysis, you've got to do the proper data, you've got to do the proper structural changes. And if we keep just going on, well, if Rachel hadn't done this and Rachel hadn't done that, everything in the garden would be lovely. Really? Really? Come on.
Thank you. Chris Smythe from the FT. Reading the chapter on welfare and how it doesn't work for people who've never been in employment, does the logic of that point in broad principle terms with basically a separate system entirely for young people? And specifically, you're critical of PIP, saying it funnels young people away from the labour market. Despite what happened last year, does the government need to go back and look at the structure of that benefit?
So two really good questions, and you and I have spoken about this previously, Chris. On PIP, look, in a sense, it's sort of unfair to blame PIP for not getting good participation outcomes, because that's not what it was set up to do, okay? It was set up with an entirely different purpose in mind. And so, you might want to question the purpose, that's a different thing, and its design, and obviously there's a corresponding review going on that Stephen Timms is leading at the moment, the Disability Minister, looking at precisely that. But it is worth noting that PIP expenditure is rising quite exponentially. And I think it's not an unreasonable question to say, what are the outcomes that are being achieved? So, first of all. And we'll come back to that in due course. The second question is a really very important one because, the benefit system, look, it sort of has, as I say, it has different purposes for different cohorts in the population. Young people have just got a different problem. And increasingly, it's a new problem. And that's the problem of disengagement and detachment. It's not that somehow they've been in the labour market. They've never been in the labour market. 60% of them have never been in the labour market. And that is just rising. So that suggests that the way that the benefit system works in terms of its focus, in terms of its policies, but maybe, I don't yet know, in terms of its structures, that's something that we need to take a look at. We need to make sure that the system is geared for the needs of young people and not just geared for the needs of disabled people or for older people. And I think that is it's a lens that, hasn't really been applied in the past and that I think we need to look at in the future.
Hi, Daisy Eastlake from The Times. You said on Times Radio this morning that the government really needs to think about the national minimum wage, having spoken to so many businesses who raised it as a concern. Could you just tell us a bit more about that? Do you think the minimum wage is too high? Would you consider kind of alternatives, particularly for those really impacted industries like hospitality and retail?
I think this is the fifth question on the national minimum wage. I'm not going to refer you to the answer I gave previously, because that's what Prime Ministers do, right? So I'm not going to do that, but I am going to refer you to the answer that I gave previously.
Hi, Athena Stavro from The Independent.
The report has laid bare the impact of mental health on young people entering the workforce. It says one group of 12 to 14-year-olds weren't going to sleep until 3 a.m. because they were doom scrolling. How do you think social media and smartphones has impacted this issue, and do you support a social media ban for young people?
Well, the government is looking at that at the moment. I don't know when they're going to pronounce. What I can tell you is if the government doesn't pronounce by the time that I come to issue my second report, which is the solutions-based report, I definitely will pronounce. I mean, the evidence, I think it's sort of pretty clear. And I read in particular Peter and Shoaib, you should talk to them, they're in the front row here. They produced a really brilliant report for us called Inside the Mind of a Young NEET, and talked to, I think, 400 young people across the country, and it's a recurring theme. You know, young people are living a different life today. They're living offline and they're living online. And this thing about sleep patterns and doom scrolling and sort of being in your bedroom in the early hours of the morning and doing this continually seems to be having an impact. And I put that together, their work, with the work that Peter Fonagy has been leading in the Department of Health and Social Care. And Peter basically confirms a couple of things. He confirms that unlike neurodevelopmental conditions, ADHD and autism, where prevalence is pretty flat in society, diagnosis is rising but prevalence is flat, distress, anxiety, depression amongst the young is rising, and he says that there is very strong evidence of functional impairment amongst young people. And what he means by that is sleep patterns being disrupted, concentration being lower, rhythm in people's lives being more disrupted. I don't know whether that is all about social media and the smartphone, and honestly, you'll never get to the root cause analysis in the end, but I don't think it's an accident. And I think we've got to really, really look at it seriously as an issue.
We've got time for 2 more quick questions.
Thanks. Anya Fox from Press Association. Just sort of following on from that, Alan, your report and today you spoke about not apportioning blame to young people, but you do say that effort matters, habits matter, and young people, their parents have agency and obligations. We've done a lot of talking about young people today. What's your message to young people?
My message to young people is a very simple one, which is don't give up. And I know the reasons that, they should. It's every group of young people I talk to. I was out meeting young people last Thursday, last Friday. I'm going to meet some young people again here this morning. The message is really very, very consistent. They're not a generation that is given up. They're not a generation that isn't putting an effort, but the reasons for them to give up are quite high. Honestly, rejection is now normal. It has just become part of the youth economy. You put in an application, dozens at a time, you hear nothing back, you just get rejected. Can you imagine that happening to you every single week, all the time? No response, no feedback, no help to help you change, help you grow, to learn what you've done wrong is distinct what you might be doing right. So I think it's hard. I mean, honestly, I have a huge amount of empathy for young people today, and I think generally, honestly, I know there's a different story around about young people, but honestly, it's a myth, this story of not trying, being soft, being a snowflake generation. I just don't buy it. I think the fundamental problem that they have is that the opportunities that we all took for granted, you're a different generation from mine, but we had the same opportunities, and those opportunities are just not around in the same way. And if they're not, that exacts a very high price on them. And frankly, it exacts a very high price on our economy and our society, and we'd better do something about it.
Hi, Sophie Church from the Daily Mail. You mentioned there's no links between immigration and the rise in needs, but new research yesterday found that 27 migrants are taking jobs for every 1 young Brit. Would you support businesses being required to offer jobs to young Brits before migrants?
Well, I think employers are going to be offering jobs to young Brits before migrants for a very simple reason, that there's a bigger pool now of unemployed, not in education and employment Brits than there are migrants coming in. So honestly, the equation has changed. And I view this as a really big opportunity, but it's not straightforward, okay? It's easy to say, oh, well, we'll just replace the apple with the apple. It isn't. This is apple and pears. You bring in a migrant worker, they're often experienced, they're often a bit older, there's a high work appetite. A young person might well have a big work appetite, but they've had no work experience, never been exposed to the world of work. And they have an opportunity to have that, a Saturday job, a bit of work experience. And so this is going to mean that employers are going to have to work a bit harder in order to get the very best out of those young British workers. But that's what they should be doing. And the deal that we need to construct, I think, as a society is if employers are going to do that, how can the government help them and enable them to do that as well? That's the New Deal, okay? And it's an important one in a world where levels of migration are seemingly on a sort of, I don't know whether it's a permanent, but a pretty clear downward trajectory.
All right, thank you, Alan, and thanks to everyone for their questions in the room. That brings the Q&A to a close.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for coming.
Thoughts there shared by the former Labour Health Secretary Alan Milburn. A moral unemployment crisis for the UK's youth, he says, as young people face shrinking opportunities. This is a focus on 18 to 24-year-olds and 16 to 24-year-olds who are not in education, employment or training, so-called NEETs, as they are described. And the latest rise has been driven by a record number who are classed as being economically inactive. An estimated 1.01 million 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK are neither working nor learning. That was between the period of January to March this year. That's according to data from the Office for National Statistics. And there was a warning there from Alan Milburn that number could increase to 1.25 million within the next 5 years. And it shows that the last time that peak was reached was back in July to September 2011. Obviously, the impact there of the financial crash of 2008. And there was also a decline that came to a halt at the start of the pandemic. And the numbers are changing. The people that are classified as being inactive economically are if they're of working age, but not in employment. And we're going to hear a lot of warnings about this. And currently, the review from Alan Milburn, said that 1 in 8 people aged 16 to 24 in the UK aren't in education, employment or training. And as I just said, that could rise to 1 in 6 in the next 5 years, around 1.25 million. The cumulative cost to the country of almost 1 million young people outside of work adds up to almost £125 billion a year, according to the estimates. And the point was made that a shortage of opportunities for young people, for example, with vacancies in the hospitality sector halving in the last 5 years, leads to what we see now. Let's hear more.
Around 7 in 10 young people first claiming a health and disability benefit are still claiming a decade later. Too many of those who could work and want to do so are not being helped. Perhaps unsurprisingly, their employment prospects are not only poor, they're deteriorating. New research we've undertaken, for example, shows that just 1 in 4 people receiving PIP at age 24 are in work. In a decade, there has been an increase of over 1/3 in those first claiming health and disability benefits and being NEET 5 years later. Today, of those who first claimed a health and disability benefit aged 16 to 24, almost half are not in work or education 15 years later. 15 years. That is a catastrophic failure. The truth is, for decades across the system, education, health, welfare, we have been spending billions managing failure and pennies preventing it. Becoming NEET doesn't start at the age of 16. A child who is not school ready at the age of 4 or 5 is 3 times more likely to be NEET at the age of 16 or 17. And yet our analysis shows that over very many years, decades, prevention has been cut at every level. Early years, public health, youth services, further education. What has grown is crisis spending, late intervention and income replacement. The tragedy is that we're paying more to manage the consequences of youth disengagement than being prepared to invest in preventing it. We end up spending more to achieve less. Worse outcomes, but higher costs. It's obvious from this assessment that reform is long overdue. In education, skills, health, labour market and welfare. There is much focus on the latter, and rightly so. But welfare reform without wider state reform will not deliver the goods for this generation.
Let's bring in our political correspondent, Rob Howell, who was at the speech, joins us now. And Rob, an awful lot of focus on young people, obviously, and the opportunities or potentially lack thereof for them to get into employment, education or training. But the point that Alan Milburn also made of an ageing population here in the UK that will be reliant on those young people too. So this is not just an issue for people who are 16 to 24, this is an issue for society.
Yes, thanks, Gareth. The first thing to say, it's a very, very hot room here, so excuse the summer attire for now. The point Alan Milburn, I think, was trying to make was that this is not something that can be solved by just another programme, another government initiative that comes in and then goes out of the door 3 or 4 years later. Right at the end of the speech, he actually made a parallel with the policy that was brought in by the Conservatives in 2010, I believe it was, to try and bring pensioners out of poverty, the triple lock. That's what he sees, I think, as an equivalent type of policy, not in terms of the nuts and bolts of the policy, but a cross-party thing that outlasts any one government, that basically tips over several bits of the state and is able to solve the problem by basically reordering the architecture and the institutions, because he says that for years and years and years, quite simply, the problem has been swept under the carpet by numerous governments and numerous parties, and it has been left to get worse and worse and worse. And with things like the advent of AI, the advent of social media, and the use of social media, it means it is getting worse right now. And he says that basically the institutions of the government are not fit for purpose for addressing the number of young people that go out of education and straight onto a life of welfare and never ever have a job. He talked about the role of schools and sort of suggested that maybe there was too much emphasis on attainment, on exams, on academia, because that is how schools are essentially rated and judged as to whether they're doing a good job, and said that actually when you talk to employers and young people, what they feel they're lacking when they come out of education is not necessarily the academic side of things, it's the more practical workplace side of things, communication, collaboration, those sorts of skills. He talked about the health system as well, and I think sort of took aim at the so-called sort of sick note culture, I suppose, at a health system that was basically too ready to push people onto a path of benefits rather than pushing them onto a path of work, and talked about the number of people with disabilities that with the right support can still have fulfilling jobs where they earn, jobs where they pay tax as well. And he talked about the welfare state as well, and how welfare needed to protect those who could not work, but at the same time the whole way it was set up was right now sucking more and more young people into it. Now, this is very much stage one of the work that he has been taking on. What we haven't had today is solid recommendations about what should be done, despite the best efforts of numerous questions from journalists to get him to speculate on that. He did say, though, that one thing employers raise is some current government policy, things like the national insurance rise, things like the increase in the minimum wage, things that make it more difficult, more risky to employ younger people. But he pushed back pretty strongly at the idea that you could just reverse that and click your fingers and it would make this problem go away. He said this isn't something that's been festering and created in the last 2 years, this is something that has actually come about in the last 20 years. So it's clear he believes this needs to involve change in multiple bits of the state, multiple bits of government. I guess the practical question is, with so much turmoil over the last 10 years and with so much turmoil in the government right now, is there the stability, I guess the long-term will to put something like this into place? He says yes, he says he's been talking to lots of different parties, but you go and talk to the pension spokespeople and the benefit spokespeople in Reform or in the Conservatives, and they have quite a different view of how to get welfare down than he has outlined today. He said it shouldn't be about just cutting welfare, it should be about getting people into work. So, look, we see a lot of these reports, and I think the jury's still out about whether this one, ends up on a dusty shelf or actually does lead to the radical change that Alan Milburn clearly believes is desperately needed.
Rob Howell joining us live from North London. Good to see you. Thank you so much.